Your phone is right there. It's been there all day. Charged, connected, notifications on. Anyone who wants to reach you can reach you, in theory. But in practice, you haven't really been reachable in hours, maybe longer. You've seen the messages come in. You've felt the buzzes. You've glanced at names and previews and let them slide past like weather you're not going out in. You're not ignoring anyone. You're just not arriving. And there's a difference, even if it looks the same from the outside. This is what it means to stay reachable, but hard to reach. The door is unlocked, but no one's home. The light is on, but the house is empty. And the people trying to find you are standing outside, wondering if they should knock again or just walk away. This isn't about being a bad person. It's not about failing at relationships or being selfish or any of the easy labels that explain nothing. It's about something quieter, something that happens without decision, without intention, almost without awareness. You drift into a kind of unavailability that doesn't announce itself, and by the time you notice, hours have passed, days sometimes, and the people who tried to reach you have stopped trying, not out of anger, just out of fatigue. There's a version of this that looks like scrolling. You get home from work, you're tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes, but the kind that makes everything feel like effort. Someone texted you earlier, a friend, a parent, someone who was thinking about you and reached out. You saw it. You meant to reply. But first you opened something else, a short video, then another. Then 45 minutes disappeared into a stream of content you won't remember tomorrow. Your thumb kept moving. Your brain stayed just stimulated enough to feel like something was happening, but nothing was. You weren't resting. You weren't connecting. You were just somewhere else, suspended in a loop designed to keep you there. Short-form video is a strange invention. It's not good or evil. It's just powerful. More powerful than most people realize until they look up and wonder where the evening went. The algorithm doesn't care about your relationships. It doesn't know your mother texted you. It just knows you're still watching, so it keeps feeding. And the thing about that kind of stimulation is it crowds out the quieter impulses. The impulse to reply, the impulse to call, the impulse to be present with someone who isn't engineered to hold your attention. Real people can't compete with infinite content. They're not optimized. They have pauses and awkwardness and needs. And when your brain has been marinating in frictionless entertainment, those things start to feel like work. We don't know what this does to people long term. Not really. There's no generation that grew up scrolling 2 hours a day and then aged into their 40s and 50s so we could study what happened. We're the experiment. Everyone under a certain age is living inside a question that won't be answered for decades. And in the meantime, messages from people who love you sit unopened while you watch a stranger make a sandwich or react to a sound you've already heard 15 times. Then there's another version, the one that looks like responsibility. You work hard, you're focused, you take your job seriously, maybe more seriously than most. Your phone is on silent because distractions cost you momentum. You've trained yourself to ignore the buzzes, to batch your responses, to protect your attention like it's a finite resource, because it is. And in many ways, this is admirable. Discipline is rare. Focus is rare. The ability to say no to the ping and stay in the work is a genuine skill. But there's a cost that doesn't show up until later. There was a man who told me about a night he still thinks about. His daughter was in her first year of university. She called him one evening, around 8. He was in the middle of something, a project, a deadline, the kind of thing that felt urgent at the time. He saw her name on the screen and let it go to voicemail. Figured he'd call back in an hour. She didn't leave a message. He didn't think much of it. What he found out later was that she'd been walking back to her apartment from the library when someone grabbed her bag. She wasn't hurt, not physically, but she was shaken and alone and standing on a street at night trying to figure out what to do. She called him because he was the person she called when things went wrong, and he wasn't there. Not because he didn't love her, not because he didn't care, but because he was in a mode that didn't leave room for interruption. By the time he called back, she'd handled it herself. She didn't mention it at first. When she finally told him, weeks later, it wasn't with anger. It was almost worse than that. It was with the quiet understanding that he probably wouldn't have answered anyway. He told me he changed something after that. Not everything. He still works hard. He still protects his focus. But he made one adjustment. A different ringtone for her number. Something that cuts through the silence. Something that says, this person gets through even when no one else does. That story has stayed with me because it's not about blame. It's not about guilt. It's about the gap between who we think we are and what our patterns actually produce. He thought of himself as a devoted father, and he was, but his system didn't reflect it. His settings didn't match his values, and when the moment came, the settings won. There's a third version that's harder to describe because it doesn't look like anything. It's the people who are technically responsive, but emotionally absent. They reply, they answer, they show up in the conversation, but something is missing. A warmth, a presence. You text them and get back, fine, or sounds good, or sure, and you can't tell if they're distracted or disinterested, or just somewhere else entirely. They're reachable, but reaching them feels like shouting into a room where the echo comes back empty. I've been each of these people at different points. The scroller who looked up and realized the whole evening had passed. The focused one who missed things that mattered because I was protecting time that didn't matter as much as I thought. The one who replied without arriving, who typed words that meant nothing because I wasn't really there. I don't say that to confess or to perform growth. I say it because recognizing the pattern is the only thing that made it possible to interrupt it. Here's the part that's easy to miss. When you're unavailable, you experience it as neutral. You were busy, you were tired, you were just doing something else. But when someone else tries to reach you and can't, they don't experience your absence as neutral. They experience it as information. They tell themselves a story about what your silence means. And that story is almost never generous. If you don't reply to your mother for 2 days, she's not thinking, oh, they're probably just recharging. She's thinking, did I do something wrong? Or, they don't want to talk to me. Or, something happened and they're not telling me. The silence speaks, even when you didn't mean it to. Especially when you didn't mean it to. Because silence without context is just a blank space, and people fill blank spaces with their fears. This is why the same behavior can land completely differently depending on what came before it. If you told someone, I'm going to be heads down this week, really focused on a project, I might be slow to respond. And then you're slow to respond? That's fine. That's expected. They're not sitting there wondering if you're upset with them. They have a frame. They can put your silence inside it and move on. But if you just vanish, if you go quiet without warning and stay quiet without explanation, the silence starts to rot. It turns into something heavier than it needed to be. And when you finally do respond, there's a residue, a small distance that wasn't there before. Not because you did anything cruel, but because you left someone alone with their interpretation, and their interpretation wasn't kind. There's a simple version of this that doesn't require changing who you are. It's just saying the thing before it happens. Telling the people who matter that you're entering a busy stretch, that you might be slower than usual, that it's not about them. It takes 30 seconds, and it changes everything about how your silence gets received. Some people resist this because it feels like asking permission, like they shouldn't have to explain themselves. And sure, in theory, everyone is entitled to their own time and their own rhythms. But relationships don't run on theory, they run on feeling. And the feeling of being left in the dark is corrosive, even when the darkness wasn't intentional. The man with the daughter didn't become a different person after that night. He's still focused, still disciplined, still the kind of person who can disappear into work for hours. But he built a small exception into his system, a personalized ringtone, a signal that says, this one gets through. It's not a revolution, it's a seam. a way of staying who he is while also staying aligned with what he actually values. That's the part most people miss. The idea that being more reachable means becoming more available. It doesn't. It means being more intentional about who gets access to the limited availability you have. It means deciding in advance, not in the moment when you're tired and the phone is buzzing and the easiest thing is to ignore it. There's a difference between boundaries and walls. Boundaries are communicated. Walls are just there. Boundaries say, "I'm not available right now, but I want you to know that." Walls say nothing. They just block. And the people on the other side of a wall don't know if you're protecting something or hiding from them. The scroller isn't a bad person. They're just caught in something that's designed to catch them. The focused worker isn't cold. They're just in a mode that doesn't leave room for interruption. The emotionally absent responder isn't cruel. They're just somewhere else. And they haven't figured out how to be somewhere else while still sending a signal that they care. But the effect is the same. The people trying to reach them start to feel like they're not worth reaching back. And that feeling, over time, changes relationships in ways that are hard to reverse. You don't have to be available all the time. Nobody is asking for that. Nobody reasonable, anyway. But there's a difference between being hard to reach because you're genuinely occupied and being hard to reach because you've drifted into a pattern that doesn't reflect your actual priorities. Reachability isn't a setting, it's a signal. And the signal you send isn't always the one you intend. Sometimes it's worth checking what your patterns are actually saying, because the people trying to reach you are listening, even when you're not. They're not asking for constant access. They're just asking to know where they stand. And standing in silence, without a frame, without a reason, without even a short message that says, "I'm here but not right now," is harder than most people realize, until they're the ones standing there.